Good evening, you're watching the Economic Bulletin here on Q News. We bring you the latest top economic stories along with expert analysis on events and trends shaping the regional and global economy. Throughout our coverage, we spotlight key sectors and highlight the defining economic developments of the moment. Let's start with the latest headlines. We'll hand it over to our colleague, Rana Qassas, for the top economic stories. What do you have for us today, Rana?
Thank you so much, Riham, and it's a pleasure to be with you, my dear colleague. And we have plenty of news and developments from all around the world. We start off with global news as World Economic Forum co-chair Andre Hoffman called for a redesign of global economic metrics to better reflect human, social and natural capital rather than focusing narrowly on financial returns. Speaking at the summer Davos meeting in China, he warned that current systems encourage short-term gains while ignoring long-term environmental and social costs. Hoffman also said natural assets such as forests and biodiversity should be treated as a core economic infrastructure alongside support for China's renewable energy investments as a model for lowering long-term energy costs.
So 57% I think was the number. I disagree with that number. I think all of it.
In intra-trade relations, the European Union has formally ratified its trade agreement with the United States, agreeing to a 15% tariff on most European exports in exchange for a tariff truce with Washington. The deal negotiated last year includes safeguards allowing Brussels to suspend the agreement if new U.S. tariffs harm European industries or volatile the terms of the accord. Steel and aluminium remain outside the arrangement, with the EU warning it could withdraw concessions if the United States duties on those products are not reduced by the end of 2026. The agreement is set to remain in force until 2029 and is expected to take effect next week. In North America, the Commerce Department has reported that U.S. inflation rose to 4.1% in May, its highest level in 3 years, driven by higher energy prices linked to the Middle East tensions. The reading keeps the possibility of further Federal Reserve tightening on the table, with markets pricing in a potential rate hike later this year. However, easing oil prices following a preliminary U.S.-Iran peace deal could help inflation peak, even as services costs remain elevated. The International Monetary Fund said the U.S. economy is showing solid growth momentum and expects inflation to return to the Federal Reserve's 2% target by the end of 2027. IMF spokeswoman Julie Kozak said recent data, including an upward revision of the first quarter GDP of 2.1%, reflects strong investment, resilient government spending and high productivity. She also said that Fed's decision to hold interest rates was appropriate, while cautioning that future policy moves should remain data dependent. Moreover, the Labor Department has reported that initial jobless claims in the United States fell more than expected last week, dropping by 12,000 to 215,000, signaling continued resilience in the labor market. The decline was partly influenced by seasonal distortions around the Juneteenth holiday and end of school year effects. Continuing claims rose to 1.821 million, suggesting hiring remains cautious even as layoffs stay limited and the unemployment rate holds at 4.3%. The Commerce Department's final revision has relieved that the United States economy grew as a stronger than previously estimated 2.1% annualized rate in the first quarter. Growth was upgraded from 1.6%, driven mainly by lower imports, though customer spending was sharply revised down to 0.5% as households cut back on services. Business investment in AI-related equipment remained a key growth driver, even as overall demand showed signs of slowing. In the United States, new orders for U.S. manufacturing capital goods rose sharply in May, signaling a rebound in business investment. No defense capital goods orders, excluding aircraft, increased 1.6%, recovering from an April decline and exceeding expectations. The data suggested continued strength in equipment spending, especially in AI-related industries, even as overall durable goods orders fell due to volatility in aircraft demand. Moving on to Africa, where Moody's has revised Gabon's sovereignty rating overlook to negative from stable, while affirming its CAA2 rating, citing rising financing risks and an increasing likelihood of debt reconstruction. The agency warned that Gabon's annual financing needs, estimated at 15% to 20% of GDP, exceed its funding capacity and its ambitious infrastructure spending and a public debt audit. Moody's expects public debt to approach 88% of GDP by 2027, despite a gradual narrowing of budget deficits, while high borrowing costs and limited market access continue to strain public finances. Gold prices reversed course and edged higher on Thursday after a U.S. inflation reading came largely in line with expectations, easing some concerns about imminent Federal Reserve rate hikes and pushing the dollar and Treasury yields lower. Spot gold was up 0.2% at $4,007.65 an ounce after falling as much as 1% earlier in the session. U.S. gold futures for August delivery rose 0.3% to $4,021 per ounce. The U.S. dollar erased gains to turn lower after the data, making greenback priced bullion cheaper for overseas merchants. Treasury yields also edged lower. And finally, global markets equity closed mixed, with gains in Europe and Japan offset by declines in parts of Asia and a softer performance in U.S. futures trading. In the United States, the Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 0.44%, while Nasdaq future declined 0.68% and the S&P 500 edged down 0.05%. In Europe, the United Kingdom's FTSE 100 rose 0.65%, France's CAC 40 advanced 0.55%, and Germany's DAX climbed 1.03%. Across Asia, Japan's Nikkei surged 4.61%, and the Shanghai Composite added 0.23%, while Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index fell 1.43%. Those were the economic top stories for the hour, and now we return to my dear colleague Riham Morsi in our studios. Riham.
Thank you so much, Rana, for the in-depth stories there on the economics. Now, for a more in-depth analysis, we move to Iraq's push for a higher OPEC production quota comes as the oil market continues to experience fluctuations while relations within the group remains under close scrutiny. Let's take a closer look. Iraq has urged OPEC to increase its oil production quota, citing the impact of decades of conflict and the recent regional war on the country's oil sector. The oil ministry has said Baghdad has repeatedly called for a reassessment of production baselines to better reflect member states' sustainable production capacities while taking into account Iraq's unique security and economic circumstances. According to the ministry, OPEC has responded by launching a review of member countries' production capacities as part of efforts to align production levels with actual output potential. Subsequently, Iraq's oil ministry has denied reports that Baghdad could leave OPEC if it's not allowed to significantly increase oil production, saying such claims do not reflect the government's official position. The ministry said neither the Prime Minister Ali al-Zaidi nor the government had proposed withdrawing from the organization. Ministry spokesperson Sadim al-Raqabi reiterated that Iraq remains committed to OPEC but stressed the need for a higher production quota. He added that Iraq would have to decide whether to remain in the group if its quota is not raised. The ministry also said OPEC members recognize Iraq's unique circumstances, including decades of conflict, sanctions, and damage caused by the recent West Asian war, which should be taken into account when determining a fair production level for the country. Oil prices were on Thursday at levels last seen before the start of the Iran war as expectations for rising supply from the Middle East outweighed demand concerns. Prompt month Brent crude futures for August delivery were down 0.34% to $73.49 a barrel. And U.S. West Texas Intermediate lost 0.34% to $70.10 a barrel. Both contracts hit their lowest since February 27th, the day before the launch of the U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran. August Brent was trading lower than September, which was priced at $73.83 at 13:27 GMT, signaling ample short-term supply. To talk to us more about this, we're joined from London by the international oil and energy expert, Mamdouh Salame. Thank you, sir, for joining us this evening here on Q News.
Thank you.
Let's start off here, sir, by asking you about Iraq, arguing that the decades of conflict, as well as sanctions and the recent regional war, having constrained the oil sector there. Does OPEC have a strong case for granting Baghdad a higher production quota, given, the numerous points that they've said?
The call for Iraq to have a bigger production quota is an old one, but not urgent. Normally, OPEC decides on production quotas based on production capacity and the volume of proven reserves. Iraq certainly has the reserves. In fact, it has much reserves than anybody else, or more reserves than anyone else. For instance, the experts who assessed Iraq oil potential decided in 2009 that Iraq sits on 400 billion barrels of oil between proven, semi-proven, and recoverable reserves. So Iraq definitely has the reserves. The question is, what quota would you give to Iraq? We are in a position now, and that OPEC is deciding which countries fulfill these criteria and therefore deserve a higher quota. Iraq certainly does deserve a higher quota. Iraq has already a quota given to it 20 years ago, which is 4 million barrels a day. But Iraq's production at some point exceeded 4.75 million barrels a day. Moreover, Iraq is planning now to raise its production capacity to between 6 and 7 during the next 7 years, provided the investments are available. That means that it will demand a production quota of at least 7 million barrels a day.
Yes.
Meanwhile, Iraq doesn't have to worry because it will get some increase in the production quota because United Arab Emirates withdrawal from OPEC means that its 3.5 million quota could be divided certainly among members of OPEC capable of raising their production. Iraq is one of these. So it is not an urgent need for this minute to raise its production, but certainly it's an important need in the next 5 years.
Well, sir, you said there that Iraq does deserve to increase its production in accordance to the number of points that they set. But how does OPEC determine or assess the production baseline or a specific criteria that would justify an increase or a significant increase when it comes to countries like Iraq?
I think I referred to that in my answer to the first question, which means the criteria OPEC uses to determine to raise the production quota of a certain country like Iraq depends on proven reserves, availability of proven reserves, and second thing, the ability of Iraq to raise its production. As I said, Iraq already has a quota of 4 million barrels a day, but Iraq has exceeded that. In certain months of the year, it even produced 4.75 million barrels a day. If not for the production cuts, Iraq's production would have hit 5 million barrels a day. So Iraq's demand for a bigger quota is justifiable on the basis of reserves and on the basis of its ability to raise its production capabilities, spare production capacity.
Yes, but if they manage to increase again the quota through OPEC, do you think this could possibly open the door for other OPEC members to revise their quota and increase capacities as well? If so, what kind of impact might it have on the group's cohesion as a whole?
You are absolutely right, and your point goes to the heart of the policies of OPEC. OPEC needs to balance the amount of quota it can increase to members and divide it among members capable of production. Of course, some members might get lower quota than they say they can produce, but that's a problem which creates a bit of friction, as it did 5 years ago between Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. UAE demanded 5 million barrel quota. Saudi Arabia said UAE doesn't have that production capacity. In fact, Saudi Arabia was proven right, because the United Arab Emirates was given a quota of 3.5 million barrels a day 5 years ago, and it never was able to fulfill that quota. The maximum before the war on Iran that UAE has achieved was 3.3 to less than 3.4. So that proves the point and difficulty of the countries or the committee deciding allocating production quota for other members.
Okay, given the oil revenues account for the vast majority of Iraq's state income, how important is a higher production quota for the country's economic recovery and development plans for the future?
Iraq is in a unique place. Its economy is 95% based on the oil revenue. So when the oil price declines, it suffers. And with the oil price rises, it benefits a lot, because Iraq has not been diversifying the different incomes of its economy. This means that during the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, it suffered most because it was not able to export oil. And of course, if it cannot export oil, it cannot finance the budget. And when there is not ability to finance the budget, it means many of the development programs of Iraq have to be stopped, if not delayed. So Iraq suffers in every way until it raises its production. But Iraq has, as I said, the biggest proven reserves in the world at 400, bigger than Venezuela, if I include recoverable reserves and semi-proven reserves. So that's why Iraq is the oil giant of the 21st century. And Iraq will get the quota increase. Otherwise, it might consider leaving OPEC. I doubt it will, because Iraq is a founder country of OPEC, and Iraq has a lot of allegiance to OPEC. So that's why I believe OPEC will compromise with Iraq and give it a quota, not what it wanted in 5 or 6 years, but at least certainly bigger than 4 million. It could range between 5 to 6 million barrels a day. That will be good enough for the time being with Iraq, simply because Iraq will get another increase, because there are not many members in OPEC that can raise its production. Certainly Saudi Arabia cannot, because of its depleted big or giant oil fields. Iraq has a chance to fill that gap, and that's why it will get a higher quota.
It's interesting that you brought up the idea there that Iraq is hinting that it may leave OPEC, because these reports have been floating around, even though they've denied it. Do you think that this is, as you said, not likely, given the fact that they are founding members of OPEC? Do you think this is possibly a pressure tactic towards other OPEC members?
Well, I repeat what I said. Iraq will never leave OPEC unless it is under a great pressure for income. But OPEC knows that, and they will compromise with Iraq. As for other countries, there are not many countries capable of raising their production. I said Saudi Arabia is not one of them. Kuwait is one. It can raise its production, so it will demand a bit more quota. Iran can, with billions of investment, it can raise its production to around 3.5 on regular basis. Iran already has a production quota of 4 million, but even that was given to it 20 years ago. But even then, when there were no sanctions on it, it never been able to fulfill that quota. This means that Iran will not be needing an immediate quota. So part of that proposed quota could be transferred to Iraq to help Iraq remain an OPEC and maximize its production. I always maintain that the last 3 barrels of oil produced in the world will come from 3 regions: the Arab Gulf region, and the second one, Venezuela, Orinoco Belt, and the third one is the Russian Arctic. But the very last barrel among the 3 will come from Iraq. That depends on a huge investment and political stability.
Yeah, well, in the unlikely scenario that Iraq does decide to leave OPEC, what would it actually mean for the production infrastructure in general? Do you think that the other OPEC members will have to significantly increase their investments within the infrastructure for production of oil, or will it not be enough to compensate the loss of Iraq?
Definitely, you are absolutely right again, because the other members don't have that capacity to compensate for the loss of Iraq. That's why I argued that OPEC Plus, in order to maintain its cohesion, it must compromise with Iraq and satisfy Iraq's demand. It might not agree to Iraq's demand immediately for a 7 million barrel quota, but it might give it between 5 to 6 million barrel quota. In that way, the cohesion of OPEC will be maintained, and Iraq will remain the proud member and founder of OPEC.
Okay, well, what would an Iraqi exit actually mean? in general for oil production around the world? What does it mean for the global economy as a whole, as well as global markets, other than OPEC?
Despite Iraq raising its production significantly, by the time Iraq achieves that in 7 to 8 years, the global demand for oil would have increased tremendously. Add to this that there will not that many of the major oil fields of the world are old fields. They have been discovered more than 80 years ago. And that specifically, I am talking about Saudi Arabia. This means that most of their reserves in these fields are virtually prices will still be rising because Iraq's addition will offset the decline from other countries, including Saudi Arabia and the rest of OPEC.
Thank you so much from London. That was the international oil and energy expert, Mamdouh Salami. Thank you so much for joining us here on Q News this evening. And now we turn to fan favorites. As attention remains in the 2026 FIFA World Cup, the tournament brings billions in revenues and millions of fans together every 4 years. But the biggest sporting event in the world is facing a growing challenge: how to keep expanding while reducing its environmental footprint. Let's take a closer look. The 2026 FIFA World Cup is breaking records on the pitch, but another record is raising questions off it. As the tournament expands across 3 countries and 16 host cities, the environmental cost of football's biggest event is coming into focus.
The World Cup is built on global travel, massive crowds, and unforgettable moments. But the same factors that make it the world's biggest sporting event are also driving one of its biggest challenges: its environmental impact. The 2026 FIFA World Cup, hosted across the United States, Canada, and Mexico, is expected to have one of the largest environmental footprints in the tournament history, with estimates projecting up to 9 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions. This would make it significantly higher than the estimated 3.6 million tons of emissions from the 2022 Qatar World Cup. Unlike previous editions, the main challenge this time is not stadium construction. Most venues already existed. The bigger issue is movement. With matches spread across 3 countries and 16 host cities, travel is expected to be the largest contributor to the tournament's footprint, as millions of fans, players, officials, and media move across North America. For organizers, the challenge goes beyond reducing emissions. It is also about redesigning the fan experience, from transportation and stadium operations to waste management and everyday choices. FIFA has introduced sustainability commitments, including targets to reduce emissions and promote greener operations. But critics argue that as the tournament continues to expand, sustainability cannot remain just a slogan. The real test is whether fans can see and experience these efforts through easier public transportation, visible recycling systems, and practical choices inside venues. Because at a tournament watched by millions, the impact is not only measured by what happens on the pitch, it is also measured by what happens around it.
To discuss the environmental impact of this edition of the World Cup and what it means for future major sporting events, we're joined from North Carolina by Jonathan Casper, a professor of parks, recreation and tourism management at North Carolina State University, who studies the environmental impact of sports and fan behaviour. Welcome to Q News and thank you for joining us, and hope you're enjoying the tournament so far.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And yes, it has been a whirlwind with so many events all across the United States, Canada, and Mexico. It's very exciting here.
Well, let's get into it right away. Now, the 2026 edition of the World Cup is expected to be one of the biggest tournaments in history, but also one of the most environmentally challenging. What makes the mega sporting event like the World Cup so difficult to make sustainable, given the fact that this edition as well involves 3 different countries?
Yeah, and you kind of answered it right there. It's the travel associated with these events that is the major environmental footprint that comes from them. When we think about the operations that happen within the stadiums, it's actually very relatively minimal compared to the travel that happens. And in this case, with the World Cup being hosted in 3 countries, it's magnified even more because of that.
Mm-hmm. Well, unlike the previous World Cup tournaments, this edition involves existing, infrastructure, as you just spoke about there. Why is transportation that includes fans, teams, and officials moving across 3 countries and 16 host cities such a major part of the environmental impact? Maybe if it was in Europe, for instance, they could have used trains, which would have probably saved the environment a bit rather than flying across different countries.
Mm-hmm. Well, mostly it's related to the air travel. The air travel itself is the major environmental contributor, and that is just something that, at least with how this World Cup has been planned, is pretty unavoidable, especially with teams playing, for example, here in the United States, playing at different venues in different states. So it's unrealistic that fans traveling from Holland or from Germany are going to use car transportation. They're going to be using airline transportation going from site to site. So the major concern from the environmental perspective is the air travel, but there is associated travel within the actual events itself, at the cities itself, which I think is a little bit easier to account for.
If we look at a fan's perspective here, how can organizers encourage fans coming in to watch matches at the World Cup be more sustainable in their behavior without making the experience for them less enjoyable, for instance, or inconvenient?
Yeah, that's a great question. Number one, it comes with planning. So having the organizers plan and have sustainable options, or at least the least environmentally damaging options, usually is the best case. And I'm not into the whole logistics of how this was, but there are options, and there are a lot of ways that fans can choose a sustainable way to attend and watch some of these games. But it really does come with the initial organization of them. One thing that we know is that, especially with the younger generations, we see that environmental sustainability and accounting for an environmental footprint for people is becoming more and more important. And so I see events like FIFA recognizing that there's changes in their fan base and there's different expectations within their fan base. And so I see that, especially with more upcoming World Cup events or other mega events, environmental sustainability is an important part of that planning process, knowing that fans are not only wanting it, but expecting it.
Yeah, well, you mentioned that there may be a number of ways to somehow make it more sustainable. What are your thoughts there? What could people do, the average person going to attend the World Cup?
Well, there's a couple options. When it comes to travel, when you do purchase your airline ticket, there are ways to, usually for an additional fee, have some of your emissions offset through other ways. So there's the actual fans adding almost a surcharge to what they are doing. Also, there's just ways to look into the transportation once at the event. What are the public transit options? Because these are major events, there's going to be there are a lot of those there. And then what are some of the decisions that they make once they're in the stadium? I will say that most of the stadiums are probably about as efficient as they can be from a sustainability perspective, especially in the United States, where
we often hear sustainable commitments from major sports organizations. How can we distinguish between meaningful action and simply using the messaging of sustainability? Because this is now the thing. As you said, the younger generation is very interested in saving the environment and sustainability.
Sorry, can you ask that one more time?
Yeah, sure. Now, we're seeing in major sporting events in general, talk about, saving the environment and sustainability.
Yeah.
How can one distinguish between just, messaging to appeal to the younger generation about sustainability and actual work towards sustainable organizations for sports?
Yeah. So it is up to the organizations to have established metrics or key performance indicators, that we'll call them, that are related to their sustainable actions. It is up to the organizations to report those out. It definitely is what we would call greenwashing if they say that they are trying to be sustainable or are sustainable, and there's not key metrics that are being measured to actually show that sustainability. It's up to us as fans of the games to hold some of the sport organizations accountable for that.
I know that Americans are not necessarily very interested in soccer, but the World Cup is a big event across the world, generally speaking. Since it's a big event, can the World Cup actually become some sort of platform that changes fan behavior across the world when it comes to how to deal with tournaments, how to be sustainable, the use of public transport, recycling, as you've mentioned, and changing everyday habits, I suppose?
I think it can, as long as it's visible and planned out. I feel like these major sporting events are a real opportunity from an environmental perspective. Now, we're going to recognize that these are major events used with major stadiums, with lots of people coming in and out, that there's going to be an environmental impact. But there's an environmental impact to pretty much everything we do from a consumptive standpoint. So using these events as a way to educate people on ways to use sustainable transportation, the way to understand what offsetting might be, and if that's something that they can adopt as part of their behavior. Looking at what they do from a stadium perspective, and people that maybe have never composted before have an opportunity to compost and realize that their food waste actually can be used for something else. These are all real opportunities that these mega events have, because it's a sport. People are having fun. They're there to enjoy themselves, and part of that consumption, there is some education that can be done in a real easy way if it's planned out correctly.
Well, can we talk a bit about the host cities for the event itself? From your research, what role do they play in reducing the environmental impact or footprint when it comes to global events like this?
Most of the organizations will hire a sustainability point person that comes from it, and so their logistics are a key part of that. So when we're talking about major events here in the United States, such as the Super Bowl, there is accountability and people that are working to make the event as sustainable as possible from the very offset, from the beginning. I know I've said it again, but I can't emphasize it anymore. It needs to be part of the planning. It needs to be genuine when it comes to that. I see a lot of times we'll say that, for example, there was a major Olympics and it was a environmental disaster, and that only happens when it hasn't been planned out and when it hasn't been executed as planned. Yes. That's really a key thing when it comes to any of these major events, is use sport as this platform for environmental sustainability in a way that people are happy. It's non-political in most cases. I mean, we'd argue about that, but it's that one opportunity where you have the attention, and especially with the World Cup, of the world. So that's a real important thing.
Thank you so much. From North Carolina, that was Jonathan Casper, Professor of Parks, Recreation and Tourism Management at North Carolina State University. Thank you for your insights. That brings us to the end of our economic bulletin for today. Thank you for watching, and stay with us here on Q News for the latest updates from around the world, for business, finance and global affairs. Don't forget to follow the coverage for the World Cup, where we will go beyond the action on the pitch and explore the business of the tournament, from sponsorships and investments to tourism, trade and the economic impact of the world's biggest sporting events. I'm Anne Morrissey. Thanks for joining us.